You're listening to Below the Surface, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings, and Killer Communications. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
A missing person, a strange death, a vanished vehicle, a series of unanswerable questions. In so many true crime mysteries, the answers remain elusive. But in many instances, the clues lead right to the water's edge, and sometimes the truth lies below the surface. Welcome back to Below the Surface. I'm your host, Olivia, and today I'll be unpacking an extremely famous case, the death of Elisa Lam. Though a forensic pathologist ruled her death as an accidental drowning, the internet disagreed. Elisa's death fueled the imaginations of thousands of online web sleuths and YouTubers who sought the answer to her mysterious end. After a decade of speculation and hundreds of podcasts, videos, and documentaries, Elisa has become less of a person and more of a legend. But is this a fair way to immortalize her? We'll lay out our theories and let you decide. Let's dive in. Born to Chinese immigrant parents in 1991, Elisa Lam was a first-generation Canadian who grew up in Vancouver with her sister Sarah. The two were very close and they shared a mutual love of fashion and art. They attended local schools and spent much of their time with their parents in their family-owned restaurant that served a mixture of traditional Chinese dishes and Canadian fare. While only minimal information has been reported about Elisa's childhood, she began keeping a personal blog in 2010 called Ether Fields. What started as a fashion blog where Elisa posted images and hot takes about her favourite styles, her blog quickly became her place to talk candidly about her day-to-day experiences with her mental health. While she never explicitly gave a public diagnosis, most of her posts dealt heavily with her depression and how the disease had made keeping up in college almost impossible. In one of her earliest posts from 2010, she detailed how she'd had to take a leave of absence from the University of British Columbia. She described it as a long, unaccounted-for break due to her brain being sluggish, and she said that she'd wasted half a year unable to learn due to sleepiness and a consistent inability to concentrate. She also suffered short-term memory loss from one day to the next, which made it impossible to remember anything that she'd read for her class. After a 6-month absence, Elisa tried returning to college, but by 2012 she'd withdrawn completely due to her intense insomnia and a relapse of her brain fog. In a post from January 27, 2012, titled, "You're Always Haunted by the Idea That You're Wasting Your Life," Elisa dictated feeling angry at herself for falling so far behind and for being the only person in her age bracket to not be busy with school. At one point, she cited, "When I cannot fall asleep at night, I'm gripped with the fear that my transcript must be a nightmare. Multiple fails and withdrawals and 3 years with only 3 courses completed cannot look good if I intend to continue on to graduate school. I hate myself for not even being able to attend one class, and I feel it is very disrespectful to my professor who has been so kind and understanding. Instead, I am left to wander the streets of downtown looking at frivolous things like clothing. But being broke, I cannot buy anything and I feel so empty." And there were legitimate reasons for Elisa's struggles. Sometimes in the mid-aughts, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. Her doctor prescribed medications, and while they were helpful to her, Elisa was not consistent about taking them, which led to serious side effects if she missed too many days in a row. One of these effects was severe hallucinations, and on more than one occasion, her sister reported that these hallucinations would scare Elisa so badly that she would hide under her bed. At one point, they were so severe that Elisa was hospitalised for them. It was a terrible mental burden to bear, particularly for the daughter of Chinese immigrants, as mental health struggles were not something that was culturally discussed, and though reports suggest her immediate family was supportive of her, there are no records of Elisa having external support other than her doctors. Not being in school only made her feel more alone, and by the time she was 21 years old, Elisa was sick and tired of being sick and tired. She knew she was a young woman with potential, and though she'd had daily struggles with depression and her college wasn't working out the way that she hoped, she still wanted to do something to experience the world. So she decided if she couldn't be in school, she would travel instead. She planned a trip all by herself to prove to herself that she could do great things. Her first stop would be a grand tour of the USA's West Coast with stops at several California landmarks in San Diego, Los Angeles, and Santa Cruz. Her parents were not happy with the idea of her travelling alone, and they tried to talk her out of going, but Elisa was adamant that this trip would be good for her. Though they were wary of her being alone for such a long trip, her parents compromised. They said that they would be happy as long as she called them every day when she got back to the hotel to let them know that she was safe and they would support her endeavour. Elisa agreed, and in late January of 2013, she left Vancouver via AbJack with her suitcase, her laptop, and a borrowed cell phone as she had misplaced her own. The first few days of her trip were wonderful. She successfully made it to San Diego, she took herself to the zoo and a few other locations, and she put some photos of her trip on her blogs. She called her parents every night as she had promised, and on January 26, she embarked on the second phase of her journey, which was 6 days in Los Angeles. She checked into a shared room at the infamous Cecil Hotel near LA's downtown before she attended a live taping of the Conan show in Burbank. However, the cracks in Elisa's mental health were beginning to show as she was reportedly removed from the taping for exhibiting erratic and disruptive behaviour. And the taping was not the only report of Elisa's mental dissonance. Back at the Cecil, which functioned more like a hostel than a hotel, Elisa was rooming with a few other young women who were also touring LA. But only 2 days into Elisa's stay, her roommates contacted hotel management and requested that Elisa be removed. They claimed that she'd been exhibiting odd behaviour like locking the door and demanding them to give her passwords to enter, as well as leaving notes on their beds telling them to go home and go away. Elisa was quickly moved to a private room on the 5th floor. And management was not surprised by the request, as several hotel staff had witnessed Elisa standing in the hotel lobby shouting, "I am crazy, but so is LA." She was also caught wandering into an employee-only area more than once, and she had to be removed. But her behaviour was not erratic all the time. She visited a local bookshop on January 31st to buy some souvenirs for her family. The store worker would later recall that Elisa was outgoing and friendly and that she seemed in great spirits. She hadn't exhibited any strange or off-putting behaviours in the store. She also spoke to her parents every night on the phone, and nothing in these phone calls seemed to cause them any worry. But this all changed drastically when she never made her evening phone call home on the night of January 31st. She was supposed to have checked out of the Cecil that afternoon and moved on to her next stop in Santa Cruz. When no call came in after her parents assumed she had made it to Santa Cruz, they knew something was very wrong. They immediately contacted the Los Angeles police to report Elisa missing, and they caught the next plane out of Vancouver to find their daughter. Though an initial search of the Cecil was quickly conducted, searching an entire hotel for Elisa was tricky. The Cecil was a mixed-use hotel with some floors for short-term bookings and some floors for long-term tenants who utilised the hotel like an apartment. But they were able to perform detailed search of Elisa's room, as well as using search and rescue dogs to sniff out the hallways, the building's exterior, and the rooftop. And while the dogs confirmed that Elisa had been in her room and in the hallways, they lost her scent at the window, and there was no scent on the rooftop. All of Elisa's belongings had been left in her room, including her unpacked luggage. And while investigators described the scene as messy, the room looked like any other college-age person's dorm. The bed was unmade, there was laundry on the floor, but nothing that would suggest a struggle or a violent act. Elisa's bipolar medications were on the bedside table, and these was collected as evidence. Interviews were conducted with her former roommates and other members of the hotel, but no one had seen her since she'd moved into her private room. Investigators also pulled CCTV from the hotel, and they found one recording of Elisa. You may have seen this footage online. It's quite infamous. I suggest watching it out. We'll link it in our show notes. But over the course of 2 minutes and 26 seconds, the footage showed Elisa walking into the elevator and pushing the buttons for every single floor. She then stood at the far back of the elevator while the doors remained opened. She peeked around the corner as if she thought someone was following her. She then hid in the corner close to the panel before looking back down the hallway and leaving the elevator. She stood in the hallway out of view of the camera, but she was clearly gesticulating at something or someone. She then returned to the elevator and pressed all the buttons on the panel multiple times before leaving the elevator a second time, once again gesturing broadly with her arms. She appeared to be talking to someone only she could see before she walked away. With no one else in the footage, the CCTV did not provide investigators with any clues. It's very, very bizarre footage. And with no evidence to give any indication of where Elisa may have gone or any of the people she interacted with, police decided to release the surveillance footage to the public on February 13th, 2013. Unfortunately, the video didn't produce any viable leads, but it instantly became fodder for YouTube speculators and conspiracy theorists. The effort to find Elisa quickly morphed into an online frenzy of armchair detectives dissecting every minute of the video. Some claimed the video had obviously been tampered with, and they cited the blurring out of the date as evidence of that. Others suggested someone had edited the video down before giving it to police, which meant there may have been a perpetrator or someone else in the elevator that was never shown. Even more YouTubers speculated that the footage had been intentionally slowed down to make it look like Elisa was acting erratically when that may have not been the case. And these speculations only spread when news outlets allowed that Elisa Lam's body had been found in the Cecil's water tank on February 19th, 6 days following the release of that video. After hotel workers had received reports from residents that the water pressure was extremely low and tap water had a terrible taste, a maintenance worker went up to check the 4 1,000-gallon water tanks on the Cecil's roof. And in the first one he checked, the body of a naked young woman was floating in the half-full cistern. Police were called immediately and a hole had to be cut in the side of the cistern to remove the body. It didn't take long for the body to be identified as the missing 21-year-old Elisa Lam, as the clothing she'd last been seen wearing was found floating next to her in the tank. She was no longer missing, but how she ended up drowned in a water tank that required getting through an alarmed emergency exit, 2 precarious ladders, and a 20-pound cover was baffling. Was this a murder or was it some kind of horrific accident? As her family was informed of her death, Elisa's body was taken to the morgue for an autopsy. Her death was ruled a drowning with no signs of bodily trauma to suggest foul play. She was in a moderate state of decomposition, which led the medical examiner to believe that she drowned on the day that she'd gone missing, which was January 31st, 2013. There were also no signs on her body or in her toxicology report to suggest that she had died by suicide. After her identification, the family was able to provide Elisa's medical history and bipolar diagnosis, which allowed the ME to test for appropriate medications that should have been in her blood system based on her prescriptions. They found that while her system did have some levels of medication, they were not as high as they should have been. And this coincided with the fact that her pill bottles contained far more pills than there should have been based on the instructed dosage. This was not surprising to Elisa's family, as she had a history of forgetting to take her medications as they'd been prescribed. Her drowning was said to be an accident and her case was closed. But as her devastated family brought her body back to Canada, the internet lit up with disagreement about the autopsy results. YouTubers and Reddit speculators could not believe that Elisa had just accidentally ended up in a highly inaccessible water tank, and they quickly took to their platforms to dissect what they thought had really happened. Theories abounded, ranging from the potentially possible to the outlandish and the conspiratorial. Most felt Elisa had been killed by one of the Cecil's long-term residents or that she'd fallen victim to a violent stranger. Based on the Cecil's long, infamous history for housing drug addicts and sex workers along their proximity to Skid Row, these theories wouldn't have been entirely far-fetched if Elisa's autopsy had shown any kind of evidence of foul play. However, as I said earlier, there were no signs that she'd been in a struggle or that someone had physically harmed her before her death. But though the autopsy report was available online, homicide theories became so widespread that they took on a terrifying life of their own. These theories morphed from Elisa being murdered by an unknown stranger to her being killed by heavy metal band frontrunner Pablo Vergara of Morbid. Vergara had released a music video featuring him singing in a room at the Cecil Hotel a few days after Elisa's body was discovered. The video's song was called Died in Pain, and it had several lyrics describing a woman drowning in water. Online theorists deduced that this must have meant he was confessing to drowning Elisa, and thousands of people began sending him threatening posts on social media. It got so bad that he had to put out a PSA citing that he hadn't even been in the United States at the time of Elisa's death. He'd been in Mexico recording a new album, which was later proven by several sources. But the internet had become certain of his guilt, and he'd received daily death threats and other horrendous messages. It got so bad that he tried to die by suicide, and he had to be checked into a psychiatric hospital. Other popular theories continued to centre around the CCTV footage of Elisa in the elevator, with YouTubers purporting that the footage must have been tampered with and that the hotel or the police were covering up something that was sinister. Some believe that the hotel was covering for one of their employees, while others believe the culprit worked in law enforcement and the LA police were letting the killer get away. And the more likes and subscriptions that these theories got, the more they perpetuated themselves, catching the attention of larger networks that went on to feature Elisa's already solved case on shows like Discovery Plus Ghost Adventures and BuzzFeed Unsolved. Some internet theorists even rented rooms in the Cecil and tried to retrace Elisa's steps based on the CCTV footage. Others visited the room that she had stayed in the hopes that her spirit would guide them to the truth. The more her unsolved case caught traction, the more conspiratorial and outlandish the theories became. By the time Netflix aired the first full-length documentary covering Elisa's death in 2021, her story had already been swirling around the internet for 8 years, and many of the theories featured throughout the documentary involved conspiratorial coincidences. One claim suggested that Elisa was being used by the government as a biological weapon to spread tuberculosis to impoverished residents of Skid Row and then executed to keep it a secret. This was believed due to the strain of tuberculosis being called Lam Elisa, which was a shortened version of the strain's name, Lipoarabinominum immunosorbent assay. Others believed her death was the result of someone trying to copy the horror movie Dark Water in a real-life scenario. The film, which was released in 2005, featured a girl named Cecilia, which many theorists found coincidentally close to the name of the Cecil Hotel. Cecilia is found dead in a water tank on the top of an apartment after residents noticed water that looked dark and tasted funny. Many online theories saw these eerily similar details to Elisa's case as something nefarious. Elisa's strange death has dominated true crime channels, news outlets, internet forums, podcasts, and blogs for over a decade. But no one has been ever able to unequivocally prove any of the internet's theories or successfully have her case reopened and reclassified as a homicide. Even in the newest coverage from Netflix, documentarians still regard the initial autopsy ruling as the truth. Elisa was most likely suffering from a bipolar episode due to forgetting to take the prescribed dosages of her medication. Since she had experienced terrifying hallucinations in the past when this happened, it's highly probable that she had an hallucination while at the Cecil, and in an attempt to hide and feel safe, she climbed into the water tank and drowned. The official investigation in 2013 cited that Elisa most likely accessed the Cecil's roof from the fire escape outside her window, and the door on the water tank was found open when maintenance workers went to investigate the water pressure issue. Whether Elisa opened it herself or someone had accidentally left it open is unknown, but it's not uncommon for people who are deathly afraid to be able to lift or move heavy things in their effort to escape. If Elisa's hallucinations caused her such high levels of fear, it's not out of reason to believe that she was able to open the tank's door. And while some point to the fact that she was found naked as a reason to suspect foul play, there are two possible explanations that do not involve violence. For one, once she was in the water, she may have shed her clothing in an effort to tread water more easily, since the inside of the tank had nowhere for her to hold on to. Or it's possible that she had undressed before getting into the tank and threw her clothes in first as part of whatever hallucinatory episode she may have been experiencing. It is impossible to exactly know what happened since the absolute truth died with Elisa on January 31st, 2013. But what we do know is how much her death devastated her family and those that knew her personally. She was a beloved daughter and sister and a member of a much larger Chinese-Canadian community. She had online friends through her blogs, and she wrote candidly and bravely about her mental health struggles, despite living in a culture that didn't want to speak about it. She loved fashion and art and had wanted to take a trip to prove to herself that she was not defined by the limits of her bipolar disorder. She wanted her life to matter. Sadly, she tragically died at 21 years old, and she was never able to fulfill any of the things that she tried so desperately to achieve. Her family buried Elisa in a quiet ceremony on March the 9th, 2013. She should have still been travelling, still enjoying seeing the world on her grand tour, and instead her final resting place is the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Burnaby, British Columbia. The Lams sued the Cecil Hotel in a wrongful death suit. They sought emotional damages and funeral costs, but a judge dismissed the lawsuit in 2015. Though Elisa's death has become an internet urban legend and there have been countless articles, specials and documentaries investigating it, her family has not participated in a single one. Their grief and their story is private, and this begs the question of whether or not the amount of speculation and attention Elisa's case still receives over a decade after her death is an appropriate way to remember her. Following the debut of Netflix's new documentary, which is titled Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, many who knew Elisa and her family were not happy with the series. The Lams said that they did not want to shed light on their daughter's untimely death. They didn't want the internet picking apart the details of her bipolar disorder and the mental health struggles that she went through. And every time there was a surge of public interest and Elisa's story is reignited, they have to grieve her death all over again. For internet sleuths and armchair detectives, Elisa's case is a sexy mystery shrouded in potential conspiracies and cover-ups. But for those who knew Elisa, her death is a traumatic and painful reminder of a young woman who faced insurmountable mental health struggles and most likely died because of them. I hope that by retelling her story here, not as a mystery to be solved, but as facts that were presented, we can remember that Elisa was not an urban legend. She was a young woman trying to live a life that made her feel like she mattered in the face of extremely difficult odds. She unfortunately did not succeed, and the true mystery is that we'll never know what Elisa could have been. Sources for this episode include Rice Paper Magazine, autopsyfiles.org, Medium, Cosmopolitan, USA Today, BBC, LAist, NBC, Los Angeles Daily News, People, and YouTube. We'd love for you to follow us on social media. We're on every major platform, so search for us on your favourites, and we'll be sure to include links in the show notes. You can also find us on our website, belowthesurfacepodcast.net. If you'd like to show your support for this show and get your episodes early and ad-free, consider an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, not only will you get early and ad-free access to this show, but to every show on the AbJack network of shows. To get started, just head over to Apple Podcasts and search for the AbJack Entertainment channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Finally, we'd very much appreciate you leaving a rating or review on the platform you're listening to us now on. This will really help us grow and it helps new listeners to find the show. And please tell your friends about Below the Surface. Nothing beats word of mouth. We will see you back in 2 weeks with an all-new episode. Thank you all so much.
Below the Surface is hosted and narrated by Olivia McKenzie, with research and writing by Abigail Belcastro, and it's produced by Mike Morford for AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to join us for the next episode of Below the Surface.